Good day, and welcome to this session of the 2025 College Sports Communicators CSC U Summit. It's our two-day online learning experience for those new in the athletic communications and creative profession, and maybe for some of those who are just seeking a career in this field, whether graduate or undergraduate students, a GA, interns, or even those who are just early on in their careers. Thank you for joining our session today. The art of research, it never ends, and how research leads to effective storytelling and getting your work noticed. Each of our four live summit sessions is hosted by College Sport Communicators CSCU committee, whose goal is to work with young and aspiring professionals and provide guidance, continuing education sessions, and mentorship. The CSCU motto is to educate educators and find our future. My name is Josh Lively, and I'm the Assistant Strategic Communications Director for the University of Tennessee Athletics, and I will serve as the moderator for today's session. We have three incredible panelists joining us today, so thank you guys so much for joining us. As a reminder, we are recording this Zoom session, and later on our CSC website and on the YouTube channel, you can watch it on demand or invite others to do so. We highly, highly encourage that. We will also offer it as a podcast option. We welcome your questions at any time. Just place them in the Zoom Q&A function and not in the chat. And then we will make sure to get to as many of those as we possibly can for our panelists. We've got lots to cover, so let's go ahead and get started. I'll let each of our guest panelists introduce themselves. We'll start with Brent and then go with Ghizal and then Leah.
Thanks for having me. My name is Brent Hager, Assistant AD for Athletic Communications at USC Aiken. Been in the business for over 20 years, from mid-major to Power 4, Conference Office in Division II, and in 2022 also founded Sport Management Solutions, which is a research-based archive company that also has expanded into helping SIDs with their everyday issues that are going on at their schools.
Ghizal Hasan with you. I'm the radio voice and a streaming voice of CSUN in the wilds of the San Fernando Valley. I greet you with the words of the great Mel Allen. Hello there, everybody. And I'm really looking forward to this seminar and excited about the people I'm on this panel with. I kind of feel like the runt of the litter a little bit, but hopefully we can work through that.
Good afternoon, everyone. Leah Secondo. I've been freelancing now and in the broadcast business. This is my 41st year. Actually met Barb Colwell a long time ago when UConn women's basketball was just trying to get on the map. I've been involved in TV sports at the news stations, as well as now freelancing for the last 38 years.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much again for being here today. Let's jump right into it. So a lot of our panel today is about research, but that is a pretty broad term in the grand scheme of things. So just to start us off, can each of you kind of explain what research looks like for you guys in order for you to be successful in your job? And Leah, we'll go to you first, and then we'll go to Brent and end with Ghizal.
Thank you. First, I usually start off my research at least 10 days, if possible, ahead of a game. Just going online, Googling different players' names, going on Instagram, going on X or other platforms to try to find some fun stories about the players and the team. Not always stat-oriented, but even fun stories, maybe things that they've done in the off-season. From there, reaching out in the meantime to the sports information people at the different schools, trying to set up interviews with coaches, which are now usually done on a Zoom, ahead of a practice or a shoot around or whatever sport it may be, so that when we get to the arena or get to the field closer to game day, our research is pretty much done, and we're just trying to find those little extra tidbits or nuggets ahead of the game, hours before the game.
And with us, it really just depends on the game. But lots of times we go through and we look at the stats like you talked about, but we also sit there, the history with the student athletes, what they've done against the certain schools here and there. We also look at the opponents. We have one broadcast person that basically tries to give a neutral side analysis at Division II. And so we try to help them out a lot and provide tidbits from the other schools as well. With our student athletes, it's more so getting to know them a little bit more and what kind of stories can we tell about them. It's not just about the stats, but it's also, do they have some type of adversity that they've overcome anything like that, that we can sit there and share to our audience, and possibly some ties to the other school or the other opponent here and there. And that's what we really like to do to help out the broadcasters and also get the best from our broadcast people.
Not much different than what the other two have spoken about. I start with players. As a play-by-play guy, you want to have there's the player aspect, there's the numbers aspect, and then there's kind of the story aspect. And in players, I'll kind of you spin in with the coaches and the history of the teams. I think that's very, very important. And then what are the stakes? What are the stakes of this particular game? And you can always find them, whether a team's going well or going not going so well. Which I know is sometimes tough when you're on the communication side. I like to talk to coaches beforehand if I can, and I know sometimes it's tough. I just had a situation where we really wanted to get a hold of a coach who I'd spoken to before, but I think that their sports information people were a little bit overwhelmed that we never got to do it. But that to me is a little bit of a baseline. And obviously, being in Southern California, if I can physically get to a practice, I love to go see a team in their natural habitat for variety, whatever sport it may be. That's kind of the baseline, and then I take my research and I'll then line it up with whenever the media notes come out. Try to line it up and then pull nuggets that are in the media notes as well, the notes that you guys would prepare.
Thank you, guys. Well, let's go right into Brent, because that kind of leads us in perfectly. When you're preparing game notes, Brent, and I know you also do a lot of archival research. So between those two, what kind of stats, storylines are you looking for that tend to resonate most often with broadcasters and other media members?
And I won't speak for broadcast people, but it also depends on the game. Sometimes it's really close; they're not going to get to as many stories. But sometimes, if there's a wide margin, they're going to talk about some other things that are going on. So we try to provide both aspects for them, just depending on the game. But I always handle the routine items that are put in the game notes, like ranging from the last time that something happened, a top like 10 facts that relate to just this game. It's just like we also have stuff to records on the dates that we play the game. Since moving to Division Two, just something fun for like that we talk about. We also put in the notes the student athletes being on the verge of breaking records or streaks that they have, whether it's a 16 game on base streak or something just sporadic in there that we can talk about. But like I said before, one of the big things is I also get to know the student athletes, so we can put a personal touch on it. One of the things it just depends. We had a student athlete a few years ago that had been adopted and moved to foster homes like 16 times. And he kind of shared that with me after 2 years of knowing him. Didn't tell anybody else before that, but just being able to talk about that later on. And it was great for him to get it out there. But it's something that several people were able to talk about, not just one game, but as we progressed to the Final Four for Division II for men's basketball, they were able to talk about that type of aspect, just a tough environment he had gone into, but just something that they could always relate to, just so they could feel like they knew the team better than others really did at that point.
Thank you, Brent. Game notes are really such a big part of SID's jobs, and then obviously broadcaster. I mean, it literally is the foundation of a broadcast. Leah and Ghizal, can you guys just talk about a little bit, how can SIDs add a little bit more context to already established storylines with game notes? Because sometimes it can be just very stat heavy, and it doesn't really push you to that next level that makes it kind of greater. So do you have any examples of that where they can just add a little bit more to help you guys out, which helps the program out in turn?
I think you have to look at, just remember that you have a play-by-play person who's looking for more stats and numbers, looking for trends through games, maybe most recent games, and how that has affected the team's win or loss. When Margaret Smith was in the lineup the last 5 games, the team, scored over 70 points and they averaged 49% from the field. But when she wasn't in the games, the 5 previous, they lost 5 and the team shot 29%. Those are the different things that I know sometimes are very difficult due to time constraints and the load that you all carry. But it's so beneficial, especially on the play-by-play side. For the analyst role, when you're looking to think about the analyst is looking at how a play came together, how it was created, who they worked off of. So maybe Margaret spent the summer with Joyce on a basketball court working on pick and rolls, and now that has come to fruition in a game. And the last 5 games, when they've been a dynamic duo on the court, the team's 10-0. So those are different types of things that both roles look at, and updating the notes along the way, I think, are really important.
I don't know how this relates, but Brent brought up a great point that everything's on demand now. So like when I prep for a match or a game, I'm watching ESPN Plus or whatever the platform is that particular conference uses. So maybe something in your notes that's not relevant now was relevant 5 games ago, and I'm watching that game and I'm picking up that tidbit that I can, that I can use, 2 weeks or a week later. So just think about that when you're updating stuff. Make sure it's clear, and both Brent and Leah said, I'm looking at trends, what's happening recently, who's going good, who's going bad, and then sometimes you can also translate that with maybe a pitcher's not going so well, but if you can point out, okay, his ERA has gone up, but in the last 28 innings he struck out 37, and it gives us a little bit of context. All right, he's given up runs, but his strikeout to walk ratio is changed, and that allows us to look a little bit deeper. So I guess, everybody's hinted at it. You're kind of trying to give us the biggest broad strokes you can that allow us to look maybe for the more fine print. I think it's a symbiotic relationship between sports communications and the broadcaster, and is you're kind of putting us on the path. It's up to us to kind of find what works for however we do it, and who we work with and how we work.
Thank you guys so much for your insight. One of the things that I learned early in my career from former boss and my mentor was that we really wanted to win the broadcast at Tennessee. Like, we wanted you guys talking about it, and Game Notes is literally our avenue to do that. So hearing your guys' insight on that is remarkable. Just a reminder, Q&A function, if you want to ask questions, anything's open. We'll try to get to as many as possible. We did have a pre-submitted question. So for Leah, what are some things that really stick out to you that SIDs can do to, improve their work, whether with game notes or just in general on game days?
I think that if before game day, if the SID can reach out once typically an email is sent out and engage and at least acknowledge, we all understand you guys are extremely busy and overloaded. But just say, hey, got your email, got your phone call. I promise I'll get back to you. And then work with the talent to, maybe have a call. Hey, can I have a side call with you guys ahead of your call? Maybe to provide you with some nuggets and information heading into the call, to ask some questions. Maybe that it'll generate some thought process to ask questions you haven't thought of. Game day, I think would be really special if when we get to the arena for like shoot arounds or baseball practice or lacrosse practice, take the time, come over, ask if you have any questions about pronunciations, even if you've already gone over it with everybody on the phone, just one last time, to assure that there's been contact with a person that maybe you've never met in person. And to have that engagement, and then also to be able to have that one last chance to go over anything, or maybe a late story that might have blossomed on the trip into whatever game it was.
Thanks, Leah. Hey, shout out to you, because all of our panelists are busy, but you're literally about to go to the D2 softball championship. So like, that's literally awesome. And like, for the attendees, like, to hear this kind of insight, really, it's just so valuable for everyone, even for someone like me who's been in the profession for over a decade. Like, just thank you so much. I'm going to go back to another submitted question from Trey Curry. He has a really good point, and so I'll go to Ghizal on this. Regarding game notes, is it best to try and provide as much information as we possibly can, and then let broadcasters choose what information they want to use, or should we try to be more selective than that?
All right, so I'm gonna infuriate Trey, and I apologize for this. I went to grad school at UCLA. I had a class with a really prominent Hollywood attorney. His name was Kenneth Payne, great guy, but his answer to everything was, well, it depends on the situation, right? It had a total lawyer answer. This depends on your circumstance, okay? If you feel, I just finished baseball. There are teams that give you a 46-page 46 pages of notes for a baseball game. But there are other teams that give you 8. And I've found sometimes that 8-page notes, the 8 pages of notes actually gives me more than the 46, which is basically just kind of box scores and stats, which we need. Don't get me wrong. If you want to put all the box scores in the game by game stats, I'm on board with that. But what I like to do, like when I do my preparation, is I'm doing talking points on each team. So if you're pressed for time, we're probably going to be able to access the stats. That's one thing I'll bring up, maybe a little inside baseball here. I know a lot of people use the the different stat programs. We use, like in the Big West, most people use Sidearm. If you can keep those sites updated, that really helps me, and then I can go back and do game for game. So if you're pressed for time and that site's updated, then you have to worry about that so much, and then you can give me that solid 8-page that 8-page breakdown of the storylines of the game. What I always ask when I talk to SIDs and coaches, I say, hey, is there something that you want? Is there a piece of information that you want out there and specifically? And sometimes it turns out to be just kind of a PR thing, but more often than not, it's something relevant that I've not thought about, in terms of maybe a connection the pitcher has, or a connection one of the players has to one of the other coaches, or one of the assistant coaches, or how they were recruited to the school. So those are all great little tidbits that you can provide. So I guess my answer for Trey is a little bit of both. It really, you got to read the room, depends on the situation. If you're going in on a sales meeting and you got a 45-minute window as opposed to a 10-minute window, same information, you can approach it a little bit differently.
Can I piggyback on that real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
And just one of those things, and I remember working at Virginia Tech, and I did both episodes. Where I had short game notes to begin with, and also for track and field, we had a national champion who had 40-page track and field notes every single week, which was crazy. But it was one of those things where you put the most pertinent information that you need to, that you want them to see, over the first few pages, because they might be pressed for time, and they're not gonna be able to dig through all 30 or 40 pages. But if it's 8 pages and your first 3 pages are all solid facts that you want to get out, I'd put everything in the first couple of pages in there that's pertinent to that game, and then let them kind of go through the rest if they want to.
May I piggyback just one thing on that too? You had mentioned like everybody's time is tight, right? But in order to give your team and your program that special service that everyone needs, providing game notes at least 24 hours ahead of it allows us to thoroughly be able to read everything. Receiving notes hours, morning of, afternoon, it's just our time that day is like a coach's time. And it's very regimented, just like your time is. So anything you can possibly do to get us the notes early, even if they are the draft a day in advance, is beyond helpful.
And I'm gonna add some as well. One of the things I learned a couple of years ago when I switched over to volleyball, we were really good. We had this really awesome storyline about a setter who had just put up in this unbelievable work her freshman year when she was redshirting. She came in, knew she was going to redshirt, but treated it as like a day one starter. I wrote this note out for her about that was like literally verbatim what I wanted the broadcast to say. I didn't really need them to like use any creative source other than, hey, just ask her about this. And then with that, I had assets to give them. We went over and got video of her practicing on this board that she would hit into, and then she would practice her setting. Literally got video of that, got pictures of it, showed different elements of that, and gave that, had it ready so that the broadcast, as soon as they asked for it, and I knew they would because I was prominent, would give it to them and they could run that on air. So just having a little bit of foresight on some of that stuff can go a long, long way, both for your program and for the broadcast team and the people behind the scenes producing. We've got some really good questions coming from the audience, so I'm going to keep it going. Up next, we have Cedric Granger from the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. He's an SID there. He asks, is there a specific style of game notes that you find engaging? I know some people use photos to make them more visually appealing, while others use numbers or graphics to make them easier to read. I also feel some people include 10 pages, while others like 40 or 50. We've kind of got to that. So from your perspective, as broadcasters, what style of notes resonates with you? I mean, a little bit of that's what we just said, but how much do you like having some of those visual things to help maybe pinpoint, hey, that's where I remember this stat. I know I can find it easily because I can visually see where to go. We'll start with Ghizal, you have any comments on that?
I'm probably in the minority. Like I'm a reader. I grew up, reading the newspaper, so I just love going down the items. I mean, graphics are helpful, don't get me wrong, but if your complete, if your release is just written out like a novel, I jump in and I'll devour that thing. So I'm a little bit different. Unless it's like a comparison, that
Mhm.
helps sometimes because then I can like literally either screenshot it or I can cut it out and paste it to my board. But for the most part, I tend to be a reader, and I absorb information better in that way
Mhm.
by rewriting it or screenshotting it. But I know there are other people who are very visual, and it really helps them. But the side by side is something that I definitely use because you can put that on your board.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Uh, Before we keep going with questions, I'm going to keep it going a little bit on our end as well. For all three of you, how do you balance hard stats with human interest storytelling in your work? And then, kind of a follow up to that, how do you keep your game notes or your broadcasts fresh with new content instead of using some of the same narratives and stories the whole season? Uh, we'll start with Ghazal, since you did the last one, I'll go to Brent and then Leah, and then I'll let you finish
Yeah.
this, okay?
Thanks for that. And how do you balance hard stats with human interest storytelling? It's it's difficult. It really is. Lots of times people, some people will go in, you just want to sit there and put stats only and say this is what we're doing. Especially you might be working with teams that don't have a lot of human interest stories to tell, and that's difficult. If you're a successful team, sometimes it seems that there's more to talk about, whether it's fair or not. It seems that sometimes there is, but sometimes if you have teams that are struggling, like I will sit there and look for more storytelling, more human interest stories to tell to make that available to people because you want to have something to talk about. And if your team's getting beat here and there a lot, it's not necessarily the best thing if you're losing softball games or baseball games, whatever the sport, lacrosse, whatever. You want to be able to talk about something else outside of you can talk about the games, but you also want something to be, well, I know that when this happened to Josh, this is a great thing to talk about. So you want to be able to balance stuff like look at your team and really determine, there's a lot of stuff that people are getting ready to break records. And I've had teams like that every single person, it seems like that was a starter, was breaking records or 4,000 point scores in the season. I mean, that was great, but sometimes you don't have that with certain sports. And so you really need to look at your team and say, what are we try to do to get the best out of the story that we're trying to tell on the field, off the field, and also look at the opponent. If you're playing someone that's the same caliber as you,
Mhm.
it might be a really intense battle. So you're not going to sit there and have as much to talk about that's a human interest story. If there's one that's that you're a lot better than, or vice versa, you're going to maybe talk about more of the human interest side. So you're going to try to find something that's more compelling to talk about during the broadcast if things go awry.
Yeah. And sometimes this, it's just like studying for a test. You might have all that information, but the game just didn't flow that way. So you're saving that information for the next game. And that typically pertains for a broadcast team that's constantly covering the same team. When I'm in and out doing a game, could be a 10 game and then an SEC game or whatever, that all the bets are off. You're still watching the flow of the game to see if that stat or trend works, and you may use it and you may not. I think it's still important for the game notes and the SID to continue keeping that note within their notes, especially as the team moves through from different broadcast teams in-house and nationally.
As far as numbers go, I try to do a story heavy broadcast, particularly if I'm doing the TV side. Radio's a little bit different with that, but I find in sports like basketball and soccer that move, I'm going to be a little more stat heavy just because you're not going to have as much time to throw it in. Guy goes to the line, you want to give, or man or woman goes to the line, you want to give their free throw percentage, stuff like that. And then trends about turnovers and runs in basketball. And soccer is very similar because it's moving. You do have a little bit of downtime, so you want to pepper in some numbers. When it comes to football, baseball, softball, or volleyball, it's more about the players, more about the athletes, more about the participants. Because the other thing I think about, I don't know how Leah and Brent would think about this. You can now go. The fan tends to be multitasking, and I got a great note from a parent that, sometimes I worry that sometimes I'm a radio guy, so that my TV play-by-play steers more into the radio realm. And a parent told me is, when I watch the game, I'm multitasking. So I like that you're given the score and you're given the count and this, that, and the other. So you got to take that into consideration, that a lot of people, they'll have their phones with them, even at the ballpark, or at the arena, they'll be able to look up a stat in case if you miss it. But if there's a great story, we had, Long Beach State just won the men's volleyball national championship, and we had a great story there. Setter, who's national player of the year, he just left one and done to go pro. His brother had also played at Long Beach State, and there were so many connections. He was Bulgarian, and the team I cover, CSUN had a Bulgarian player. So there were all those networks running together, which if I didn't make, I would have looked out of my element. I always regret there was years ago, I called a baseball game where a brother was pitching to a brother, and I gave all the relevant information, except I forgot, it was before the pitch clock, so I can't use the pitch clock as an excuse. I just didn't mention they were brothers. I gave every other, same high school, this, that, and the other, and they had all this stuff in common. And I saw the dad later. I'm like, hey man, I'm sorry. He's like, well, you got everything else right, so I'm not worried. But as far as to answer the question, I tend to lean more on the story. As a play-by-play guy, I tend to lean more on the story side, but you still want to be relevant. Leah was talking about, you want to be relevant when it comes to the stats, especially on the TV side. On the radio side, I'm probably a little more statistically dependent, just because you're not seeing what's going on. I'm trying to give a little bit more context.
Thanks, y'all. I'm going to answer one question that we got real quick. It says, it's from an anonymous attendee. Is there a need to do game notes if you're at schools at the Division II or Division III level that do not have broadcasters calling your games? I would say it does vary on the sport. So even at SEC, swimming and diving, a lot of people do their own research. I've tried doing game notes before, and the person that does it has covered swimming so much over their career that they don't really need SID. So to an extent, I would say I wouldn't make it you're not making a 40-page packet if no one's using it. But I would also argue from the different element, we had a person a few years ago who used to be at, I think, Utah Valley, and his team was not very good, and they really weren't doing anything. So he's like, I'm not going to keep doing game notes. Our team's terrible. Like, our season's about to end. And then their team went on a massive run during the conference tournament and made the NCAA championships out of nowhere. So I would say at least have something small ready and keep it kind of up to date that you can, give out to any media that may cover your games or events. And then also maybe use that as part of your preview or for even social promotion. If you're already putting out in social and doing the research, just put it into words and have it somewhere ready to go. It doesn't need to be some grand thing.
Can I suggest one thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
I would sit there and say that, like, I'm at a Division II school right now. And so some of the sports, we do a weekly notes package where it's covering the upcoming games for the weekend. Sometimes we have every single home broadcast we have someone there, but some of the people on the road use our same notes that we put on there, and we put something up every single Tuesday for the teams in season. And part of it's just a way to put the notes to also turn over your something that's going on your website. So say if you're coming off a 0-3 week, you can still find 4 or 5 nuggets to post, not very much in-depth game notes, but something to post on there to make that next story on the website on that page. So it's something positive on there to sit there and say for other people to look at as well. But we have people on the road that take our notes and use them like they're their own. So I mean, that's kind of helpful too for other teams. So I suggest go ahead and using it and maybe making something small on your website weekly or just to be able to turn over your website.
And then to piggyback on something.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Leah.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I want to piggyback on something Leah said, because she's doing the drop-in stuff, right? Like, I'm covering a team. Occasionally when I freelance, I'll do a team that I haven't covered. It helps me if I can go back 3 or 4 weeks and find, information from the media notes, because I haven't covered the team. So I'm going back, and then on Brent's point too, we had the team that won the Big West men's basketball championship this year was a team with a bunch of D2 transfers. So it's nice. I don't know what the archival capability is. A couple of those teams had their game notes archived, and I was able to go back into those game notes, a year or two before, and extract information. So keep that in mind with the whole, Barb made the great point about this being on demand. They say, what is the internet never dies? Well, if your notes are on demand, that's information that can be accessed once the player has left and they're going somewhere else. And obviously with the way the transfer portal is now, you never know.
Division II and Division III is just as important as Division I. And any broadcaster will tell you when they prepare, the preparation is no different from when we do one division to another. And while we understand that you may not normally do game notes because you don't have the TV coverage or newspaper coverage, once your team progresses to the point where you're going into postseason, and then especially if it's basketball or softball or lacrosse, there's a really good chance that that coverage is going to be boosted up to that next platform. And it may be only, ESPNU or CBS Sports Network. That's not only to your program and to your school. That's the Super Bowl of where that student athlete's, hoping someday to get. So if you can at least, once you anticipate your team getting to that level, thinking ahead, providing with some bullet points of what the player has done. And the stats we can find, maybe some of the hard stats, All-American, first team, but, some other nuggets to add to it to help us to at least get off the ground that first day or so of a tournament championship.
Y'all. Brent, I'm going to come back to you.
Yeah.
What are some of the strategies that you use to consistently uncover new and compelling stories within your program? And then also kind of in the same vein, how do you tailor your communication when pitching some of these stories to different platforms? Because obviously a lot of what we're talking about is broadcast here, but
Right.
there's also print. Some of it is your local TV stations, social media, and then you also then incorporate the broadcast. How are you kind of handling what you're giving to who? Are you giving it all? Or are you giving something to one and then another that kind of helps build a story?
Right. Well, one of the strategies I use to start with everything, I get back to the thing that I love doing, which is the archives. I'll tend back and go back through from the earliest time till to present for looking at things over season stats, record books, anything like that. But I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we talk about, we have our student athletes fill out a questionnaire at the start of the year, and then we have them, also put in 5 to 10 facts that we, just that we know about them that we can use later on. And so day one, we might have seven or eight good stories for, whatever sport it is, but we're not going to put it out day one. We're going to wait and see who the stars are, and hey, is this person coming from the bench to a star now? And then we're going to talk about, something that they've overcome or something that goes along with their story to kind of feature different people throughout the year. When it comes to the media, whether it's, print, TV, radio, we are in a market right now that we're fighting, at the school I work with, we're fighting with another Division II school that's right 20 minutes down the road. So we're fighting for coverage with that. So we can talk to the different places about every single story we have, but they're not going to use every single story. So sometimes we sit there and we might share 1 or 2 stories with one outlet, a couple of stories with a different outlet throughout the year, because they are not going to sit there and cover all 8 stories. They're going to say, give me 1 or 2 good stories per season, and they will jump on it in a heartbeat to do a great job with it. But you have to sit there and pick and choose what you're going to give to different people. Does the print paper, the newspaper, do they want to sit there and use someone that's more local? Most of the time they do. So we try to sit there and feed that. TV, they were fine with being able to broadcast because they reach, 3 hours away with their station. So we have to look at that. We're trying to pitch the different stories. And one of the things, though, that I was taught by Hall of Fame SID when I was working at Presbyterian College, he was working the ACC. He said, no matter what stories you give out to other people, you can tell your story better than everybody else. We might only get a 2-minute segment on the news or 1,000 words in the newspaper. But if we want to sit there and tell our story the best with this student athlete or a coach, we can sit there and make it into a 5-10 minute video with the 2,000 word story if we want to. It's nothing like they cannot share our story well, but we can tell our story better than everybody else can at the school standpoint. But you want to be able to get your story out there as best as possible. So I try to sit there and see what they want, kind of talk to them and see what kind of story they're wanting, and kind of pitch them a couple of things along the lines of that, and maybe something completely different that you can get them attracted to talk about with the TV stations. But it really just does depend on the story and what they're really looking for, and then kind of say, do I have something that fits their narrative or something even better than what they're talking about? But I try to sit there and share different stories to different outlets. At the end of the day, they're like, well, we saw this over here, we want to do something on them too. So sometimes they piggyback off each other, and which is great. Whatever we can do to help them out, we will. It really just depends on the situation, though.
Thank you. It really is important to share some of those stories with different media members. can be exhausting for them if it's the same story recycled over and over and over for everyone. So it's a big help for them. I kind of have a double part question for Leah and Ghizal, both from a predetermined question and then one from one of our attendees. So I'm going to kind of combine them. When calling a game, what kinds of background information or notes elevate your storytelling the most? What can SI do to make your job easier?
Okay, as far as game notes are concerned, I think, if you can think about including in your notes how the team compares big picture nationally and find some nuggets in there that are fresh and new, then how your team compares within your conference, and find some new nuggets in there, which every week they're changing, and then look at what's going on within the team and the team's trends. But try to keep that, again, as the gentleman talked about in the beginning, on one template, on the same template. And I think the best example that can be used for a number of sports is USF women's basketball. The SID there has a template that can be used for a number of sports, and it has where they're from, their height, their weight, what they're going to school for, a couple of bullet notes, a couple of stat notes, and it's all on one page, and it's very, very helpful. And again, it can be used for many different sports, and I would suggest that.
And everything that Leah just said is correct. I'll give you a little bit different perspective. There's a great movie that I love. It's called Walk the Line. It's about Johnny Cash. And I'm not really a country guy, but I'm a huge Johnny Cash fan. And there's a story where he goes to the studio and he's playing, and this is back when Johnny Cash is playing gospel, and the guy tells him, "I don't believe you." And Joaquin Phoenix is playing Johnny Cash, and he goes, "You don't believe that I believe in God?" And he says to me, you're down in a ditch, you're dying. What's the last thing that you're going to say? What's that song that you need to get out? And I'll say it to you guys in that. What are those 7 or 8 tidbits that you absolutely need to have on the broadcast, or that you absolutely need to get out? And that really helps us a lot. We know what your priority is. We can understand that. And then anything outside of that that is of my interest, I'll go off on that track and find that information. But players, coaches, trends, all that stuff. What's the national thing? We had a good discussion about context, and I had a broadcast mentor of mine tell me, he said, if you're going to say who the #1 all-time leading scorer is, you better know who's #2. Or, if you have a player coming up, we just had a player on the home run list for Oregon State. He was going to be the all-time home run leader for the history of Oregon State baseball, which is a pretty great program. Well, you better know who he's passing. When Hank Aaron passed Babe Ruth, everybody knew it was Babe Ruth. When Barry Bonds passed Hank Aaron, everybody knew it was Hank Aaron. And it's the way sports works. When the Red Sox finally won the World Series, everybody knew the last time they'd won was 2018. I call college baseball. There's 16, it's been hammered in. The number's gone up in the last 5 to 10 years. 16 men have taken multiple teams to the College World Series in Omaha. Those details are exact. So that's the sort of context that we're looking for. And then obviously the nuts and bolts is all the stuff Leah was talking about is, hey, give us a context in terms of the conference, in terms of the nation, and the stats within the team. And the more you can squeeze onto one page, the better it is.
Thanks, y'all. Again, my apologies for the issues there. For everyone, can you share a good time when research kind of changed how the story was told for you guys, whether on a broadcast or even within just a feature story or something like that? And it led to a story being told that otherwise wouldn't have been told. And we can start with Leah and then go Brent and then end with Ghizal.
I'm going to have to go way back in time. Nikisha Sales was trying to break and become the all-time leading scorer at UConn. That was a long time ago. And she had injured herself. And so there was a storyline there. And they got her out on the court. And she, they hobbled her out on the court, made the basket, becomes the all-time leading scorer. And there was much said. There were a lot of different stories off of that. And I think it probably didn't play the way some people had thought it would play, but it totally took the course of the day and the event in a different direction.
And I'll go a little bit farther back than you. This is just it's more so based off my business, and Josh knows this is coming. So I got a couple of quick ones. I was doing work for a school and adding their archives back in there. So I was basically adding their year-by-year rosters from their media guide. They had the all-time letter winner list, and I made all-time rosters, started adding their rosters to their website. And they had a grandson, he's adult there, but his grandfather said that he played at Northern Illinois. Well, they reached out to Northern Illinois, and their SID is like, well, he's on our website right now. The person who played for NIU for one semester before going off to war. And they were able to find it quickly. They're going to be able to find it anyway through their research, but they're able to find the story quickly. And they ended up sending him a letterman's jacket from 1941 before he went off to war, even though he's only at school for one semester.
Nice.
And just me being able to help out with that a little bit. They did, they had all the work that was there, but me being able to help out with that a little bit was kind of cool to me. It's probably one of my favorite things I've worked on. Another time, research adding, year-by-year rosters. There's an outfielder that had individually played with Ty Cobb for the Detroit Tigers back in like 1916. It was one of those things that was pretty cool to be able to add that and let the school know FY, whenever your alumni played there. And the final one I'll do really quick was I was adding game-by-game box scores, typing it up during COVID for an NAI school with the business. So, hammering stuff back up from like 30 years back for basketball. Comes to find out that school played against Keith Van Horn in Utah in a Christmas tournament. They had no idea about that because they didn't have it on their website or anything like that. So just being able to share back with them that their archives help, for them to be able to reach a story that happened, several years later, they could go back and talk to the student athletes that compete against him at that point. And for me, being able to help schools tell that story from the business side has been fun. I do the same thing with USC Aiken and other schools I've worked at, but those are three of the bigger stories that I've been able to work with that have changed the way that stories with the research that we did.
For me, it was fairly recently. It was a guy it was a big time schoolboy star in Chicago, had a gap in his participation. He kind of had a 2 to 3 year gap between high school and junior college, and I learned that he'd been arrested. That's why he didn't participate, and then he happened again between junior college and the time he got to the D1 school. Now he'd been like a 30-point a game scorer in high school, and he was the 9th or 10th guy on this roster. And so I found this story, and it's not nowhere in the notes. Obviously, I think not because of any kind of ignorance or trying to hide it. He just didn't play. Well, of course, this is the game where a couple of guys get in foul trouble. All of a sudden, he's playing, and now he's lighting it up. And so, I there've been a couple of news stories that I was able to access about the arrest and the circumstances around it. And so it kind of wove that story into the broadcast. And so I get a call from the SID, their SID, who's a visiting team. And I'm like, oh, here we go, But he said, you know what? Let me tell you something. You handled that about. I mean, I kind of viewed it. I told it as a story of redemption. Like, here's a guy that had everything go against him, and he got to the right coach. A coach that he played for was a disciplinarian and believed in him. And he'd had some players at a previous team that had a little bit of legal trouble and had them work through it. So that's how we kind of pitched it. And it worked out really well. The kid ended up having a great rest of the year. I think he's playing professionally somewhere overseas now. But I felt good about that, first of all, being able to find that information, and then a guy who we weren't expecting to play. That's kind of, that's where the moneymaker is, when that in basketball, that 9th, 12th, 13th man or woman on the roster, when they get in the game, can you give us a little something? So I felt pretty good about that. That was a story maybe a lot of SIDs wouldn't have been happy about, but the result was good. So we'll leave it at that.
Y'all. Well, we're kind of wrapping up on time, so I'm going to ask you guys each to give us one kind of brief final takeaway or advice for the audience. We'll start with Brent and then go Ghizal and then Leah to finish us out.
The biggest thing that I learned, everything can be a story. I mean, really, you sit there and you say, well, this isn't a great story. Well, it could be, because you never know who it's going to affect or how it's going to get out and get portrayed in the media. So if there's a nugget out there, be able to sit there and take it and be able to share it at some point. Maybe not everything at one time, but take the nugget and be able to share that information, because if it's a kid overcoming adversity or something like that, it might help somebody else that's watching the broadcast or watching the game or seeing it on your website. So make sure that you're able to tell the story as best way you can, because you never know who's going to be helping.
Mhm.
I had a conversation recently with a guy who'd been in professional baseball for 20 years, and now he was doing college baseball. And he said something to me that was very insightful. He said, these guys don't have a story yet. And that's really that's your assignment, right? That's your mission. You're telling us, it's kind of like a movie, right? You're giving us the synopsis, and then it's up to the broadcaster kind of wind that into a bigger story. You're telling us, hey, this tough New York cop John McClane's going to visit his wife in LA, and they're separated, and he got invited to the Christmas party by accident in Nakatomi Plaza, and he goes to reconcile with his wife, and then this terrorist, Hans Gruber, shows up, and hilarity ensues. And that's kind of what you're giving us, and then we're kind of filling in. Like I was saying, you're giving the broad strokes, we're giving the fine print, and we're partners in this storytelling. You're kind of giving us a platform from which to take off on. So, and I appreciate all the work, and I know a lot of you guys, like Brent was talking about earlier, you're working for maybe NIA or Division II, Division III, and community colleges, junior colleges. You guys are almost more valuable than not nothing against Josh, but I mean at Division I level, you have all kinds of resources that are available to you. And I'll leave you with this, and not to drop names or anything. Quincy Jones told me never to drop names, but I got an audience with Adrian Wojnarowski earlier this year when our basketball team played at St. Bonaventure, and he said something really interesting. So covering high school or lower level college is way more difficult than covering the NBA, and that always kind of stuck with me. So fight the good fight, provide the right info, and you're it's the notorious BIG. You got a story to tell. Make sure you tell it.
Any broadcast involving any school, it's your roughly 2 hours for your school and you in what you do to shine. So anything that you can do to provide us with information so that we can sound eloquent helps us to help you, to help the coach, to help the players get the word out about just how great your programs are. And again, we completely understand how just bogged down all of you are with all the demands and multitasking that you are doing. I know I greatly appreciate it. I know the other gentlemen do as well.
What an incredible panel, guys. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to come and present today and share some of your thoughts with this this discussion that just offered so much fruit to people who are early in the industry, getting their foot in the ground for a topic that is just tremendously important. Again, to everyone, this session will be live on demand, or will be on demand later on our CSC website as well as YouTube, and they'll also be available on your favorite podcast channels as well. Make sure to look at the 2025 CSC U Summit schedule for the other 3 sessions as well. Within a few days of our live sessions, we'll be sending a short survey to all the attendees via email. We ask that you please take a few minutes to provide your feedback and evaluation so that we can stay relevant and enhance our summit for next year. Again, thank you guys all, panelists and attendees, for being with us today.